Hello, friends, and welcome to the Weekend Catch-Up Club, the coffee morning show brought to you live every Saturday direct to Facebook and available later on demand at youtube.com/gamertagged and podcast services. Grab yourself a drink, kick back, relax, and hang out with us for the next hour-ish or so because it's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, joining me today is none other than an actual bona fide scholar. We have Gabriel Elvery, Games Research PhD. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Hello, well, nearly. Still on the way to the PhD there.
So
couple of years.
It's so awesome to have you, and again, of course, thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We were just chatting backstage, as if I've got an actual studio, off screen before going live about your wicked, almost green screen. It's not quite covering the background, but it's doing a decent job.
Yeah, it tried. We were going to give it a go, but obviously with these setups with Zoom and Discord and all of the sizes of the screens are different. So it was covering up, but not quite enough for this one.
So, Gabriel, please tell us your field of research. Like, what does it entail, and what made you decide to choose this as something that you wanted to invest your PhD in?
So basically, what I study are fantasy video games. Well, that's how it started, because I did a fantasy literature degree.
Okay.
And then there was a really great module on there called Fantasy Across Media, where we got to look at fantasy in all different kinds of mediums and things like that. And we had video games week, and all of a sudden I felt like, wow, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be looking at video games, whereas I'd always felt a bit lost looking at the literature and things like that, because I did find it interesting, but it just didn't intrinsically motivate me quite as much. So then I was really lucky to find a lovely community called the Game Studies at Glasgow Reading Group, which actually we've brought online throughout lockdown, and now it's the Caledonian Studies Reading Group. And we've got people from all over Scotland in there, and actually all over the country, and sometimes all over the world when the time zones line up. But that was a really important part of kind of developing a community of practice and finding out what kind of scholarships out there, because I hadn't gone through a kind of game studies degree or anything like that. When you kind of pick your field of study, it's mostly what interests you, and also how lucky you are, where you are, and the people you have access to. So I was kind of lucky that the fantasy literature degree started in Glasgow, because there's so much cool gaming stuff in Scotland as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the rough way I came into it. So it's kind of a bit of this and a bit of that, and trying to find my own way and piece it together rather than a defined career path.
Yeah. So what kind of things are you like doing as part of your PhD that's focused around video games?
So what I'm super interested in the moment is this thing called Parasocial Relationships.
Okay.
And you might have heard of it with like YouTubers and presenters. It's something like perhaps you do. So you're kind of making friends with people, and your viewers might feel like they know you and get a bond with you.
Okay, yeah. I'm nodding as if I know what you're talking about with all of these terms.
Well, so there's kind of a difference between knowing someone and interacting with them.
Yeah.
And having like a real chat and getting to know somebody from like a role of presenting. So this kind of idea of a parasocial relationship was developed in media studies in the 50s.
Oh, okay.
And it was mainly to do with kind of talk show hosts and people like that. It was called intimacy at a distance.
Right.
So you would kind of react to the hosts as if you knew them and things. And what I'm interested in is thinking about that in video games. So the NPCs can actually talk back to you, and it actually looks like we're making an impact on their lives, and you can see their relationship needs and things like that. So maybe there's a kind of social interaction that goes beyond the parasocial interaction on there.
Wow.
And that's kind of what I'm interested in.
Yeah, because we sometimes feel overly familiar with people that we see every day on, like, in the media, or if we watch podcasts or listen to podcasts, we think that they become our friends kind of thing. It's like we know the person, but it's sometimes that is what the person's like, or it's just a like a show. They're putting on a personality for the purposes of the whatever they're creating. And it's the what presenters do, really really good presenters, is they make us feel like we're in the room with them, or like we are, as viewers, are bringing them into our house and into our lives. So that's super interesting aspect, this parasocial like connections and stuff. It's really interesting.
I think sometimes really people that seem authentic, sometimes it's not even putting on a personality as such. It's like part of how you are is shaped by your context and by what you're doing. So you show certain parts of yourself, you amp up some bits, you dial down others to kind of fit. Mm-hmm. So sometimes maybe people do make characters and personalities, but also sometimes there is a kind of authenticity there that's like a projection of what somebody wants to show you. Mm-hmm. But with video games, the characters aren't doing that. It would be really meta if they were. But most of the time they're just written to be how they are. So even though it can't replace socializing with somebody, mm-hmm. there's an idea that it could perhaps supplement that social interaction. So people in lockdown, for example, are getting really attached to their Animal Crossing New Horizons neighbors and things like that. And there's even some games that will text your phone. So it's like you're making friends with someone real time. Right. So it's a bit of kind of safe social interaction because, I mean, generally you can reload or you're not actually going to upset anyone. So if you're a bit anxious and a bit shy like me, then you can kind of use the video games to kind of, I don't know, kind of test things out.
Yeah. So there's not any extreme long-term consequence as such. Like in real life, there can be real consequences. It's still the game context, but it's trying to capture that feeling of an actual interactive relationship. But yeah, it's still a game, so there is a little bit of it's not quite real life. It's finding that balance, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's kind of less immediate consequences for being the way that you are and testing things out. It's a bit less pressure, and often you can pause. There's some games like Mystic Messenger where if you can't pause it and it's live, and the consequences are in it's kind of like a visual novel but in a mobile,
right?
And you can have really bad endings if you don't text them back. So I guess one of the consequences would be like if you're actually hanging out with your friend or your partner and you're like, excuse me, these anime people are messaging me, I must pause and spend time with them because otherwise it's going to ruin my game.
That's so fascinating because a little while ago, and I think it's actually still current, there's a huge concern about the population of Japan. They're not, their population is actually going down, and then the average age is obviously getting much older because it's this virtual life. It's interacting with anime figures on your phone or on your device rather than actual interactions, and therefore people are not really socializing physically anymore. And therefore, they're not like going on dates necessarily. They're not establishing real life relationships because they're so focused on the relationships with this like virtual creation.
Yeah. See, I think there's a problem there with kind of causality. So I say because there's also this big debate about video game addiction, which is kind of similar to that. And maybe some of the problems in Japan aren't necessarily caused by the games, but maybe that's where people are going to get something that they're not getting because of the crazy, the workaholic capitalists principles of how the society is structured. Because if you're working that hard and you're putting that much pressure on yourself, you're not actually having the time to go out and socialize with people, which means you're more likely to turn to this kind of media. So it's not necessarily the game's fault. It's like with video game addiction, there's kind of studies that look into the fact that sometimes people will go into the video game worlds more when stuff is going wrong in their lives. Right. So it's not necessarily the game that's causing the thing. the game is kind of being used as a means to find something that someone's not getting.
Right.
And it's not necessarily conscious either. It's just they like the game, they get good feelings from it, so they're going to gravitate more towards that.
Right.
And it can be kind of like a support system, a kind of like scaffold. It's like a buffer that can maybe make you a bit more resilient to things. If you have that place that you can go to and experience something nice, that's going to mean that hopefully eventually you can take that with you and use those nice feelings to kind of do better in general.
Yeah. As a part of that, like sometimes, you know, you're talking about escape there to these worlds that we have some degree of control. Do you think that's obviously a part of it, where like real life is maybe like too overwhelming or something's not going right? It feels overwhelming and out with our control. Whereas if I'm doing something in like Animal Crossing or Final Fantasy or like an Assassin's Creed game or whatever that virtual world and space is, I feel like we're in control there. We can actually affect it and it's not overwhelming us like that tidal wave feeling of just helplessness.
Yeah, because in games you actually have a choice to play, whereas in real life you don't necessarily have a choice to work. You might just have to do something that will pay the bills or whatever. Whereas in Animal Crossing, you're kind of, there is that very strange kind of Tom Nook figure who is exploiting you. So you're kind of his indentured servant. But,
he's a gangster. He's a mafia boss.
Yeah, but I mean, at least it's our choice. So,
yeah, we're willing to, like, we're actively racking up all of this debt without. I now owe Tom Nook about 10 million bells. But if you just take out this extra loan, he'll give us a plot of land or another bit of furniture or another access to a different part of the island. It's so funny. Like that side of gaming is it's like we're doing menial tasks in those games, whether it's Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing, to plant and farm and build this little utopia for our escape. And it's day-to-day menial tasks that we would normally do in our real life, but we're choosing to then do this in a virtual context, like all over again, but have some kind of degree of control because it's this idyllic paradise island.
I guess that's why different types of games are super important to look at as well, because you do have these games and like the hyper grindy games like classic WoW and things like that, and some JRPGs where it's all about progression, it's all about accumulation, and part of that is kind of exacerbating and extending the mindset that we already have about this is the way that we should live our lives. And it gives us kind of concrete goals, which can be really good to have. But then on the other hand, you also have walking simulators or, I mean, Animal Crossing is a good example in a way because it has a bit of that, but also you can stop to smell the flowers. You can sit on a bench and just chill out. And there's a really cool paper at the journal that I co-edit, which is, I'm vice editor at Press Start. And that's about moments of stasis and stillness in games, and thinking about how the act of being still can be a form of resistance. So we kind of have to think about these games as frameworks as well, of like, maybe we can control them, but also some of them are just giving us the illusion that we can control them because we're doing very similar things to what we've been taught to do.
It's so fascinating as to like what resonates and what is going to capture people's interactivity and engagement in a way that you would think wouldn't be very engaging, because it's okay, you're just doing like real life stuff, but because you're doing it in this context, it's like millions of people just fall in love with it and use that as a release, as an escape. It's so strange, but so fascinating at the same time.
Yeah, I think like Pokemon Go, when that was released, was probably the closest we got to world peace for a bit. I can't remember who did that, but it was a case of that is kind of working in the opposite way. Right. So that game is using the fantasy to get us to do something that we kind of should be doing every day, like going for walks, and well, when we're allowed chatting to people and things like that, and being communal. And it's using the Pokemon as a motivation to go outside and do stuff. Right. So it kind of works in the opposite way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that classic. Just go outside for a walk, put your video game down. But Pokemon Go was like, I could take the video game with me and play the video game whilst we're in this real life going for a walk kind of setting. And that was such a craze, right? It captured millions of people all around the world. I remember seeing viral videos of Central Park just flooded with well, maybe not millions, but hundreds of thousands of people all trying to find these elusive like Pokemon and the Pokestops and everything. It was what a global phenomenon that was.
I remember actually personally, I had this job and I was quite tired of it and I was very depressed. And my phone stopped working and I couldn't play Pokemon Go on my way to work. And I was like, I'm not going in. I can't do it. I can't catch Pokemon. So I'm staying at home. And I didn't go in that day, which is probably a good idea for my mental health anyway. However, the Pokemon Go game, like, at least gave me some kind of motivation to go and do something. Because sometimes we're not always intrinsically motivated to do it. It's nice to have that little bit of extrinsic motivation, a bit of like shiny bleep bloop.
It's so true as well. And that had the added benefit of creating some real life relationships and connections as well, because everybody was coming together for this one purpose. As you said, it's like a world peace kind of moment, unless you ended up trying to fight, I guess. I don't know if that became a thing. It's like, no, I need to get here, and stampedes in the road and taking over the whole location.
Luckily, I think it was a bit more flexible than that. I never got into a Pokemon brawl. But I think maybe I just look too tough and they'd be scared of me. So.
Possibly. Yeah, so have you seen the latest big MMO craze at the moment, Valheim, where it's a Scandinavian set, massively multiplayer online game, but it's supposed to be around like survival and in the wilderness and living and stuff. So I've seen people online just like spending hours chopping wood, just so they can get enough resources to either like build a fire and then build a house, and then they have these incredible structures. It's something that's very like you form a deep connection with just these menial tasks, which can then lead to some kind of creation. I mean, it's why Minecraft is so friggin' popular, right? It's people create these incredible other worlds just by chipping away at these little pixels in their games. It's so strange, but it's such a thing to tap into that can be incredibly powerful.
And meeting people in MMOs is really interesting as well. So there's a really cool podcast called The Psychology of Video Games, and they talk about how with MMOs you make friends backwards.
Right.
So basically, generally off screen, when you get to know people, you kind of like them and you vibe. So then you ask them to do stuff. And then later on, they prove whether they're trustworthy or untrustworthy. But when you're doing things like organizing raids, the people that turn up, you know immediately that they're reliable and they can be depended on if they're like healing you the right way. They're not just like running off straight into the mobs and things like that. So then you kind of make friends with the people that turn up.
Right.
And sometimes that can lead to even more kind of like reliable friendships because you've already gone through a kind of shared experience together online, which is really cool.
Yeah. What is it? What is it they say? The friends who raid together stay together.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. It's really fascinating. These virtual extra life, almost Sims as well. It's God, it's so strange. It's so strange. But one of the topics that you that actually brought me to brought you to my attention was your podcast that you did with Dominica, who I had on the show as well, and it was the connections that people make to certain characters in games, which I thought was super fascinating because people form like deep connections to these fictional characters. Whether it be like Lara Croft from Tomb Raider or Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn, or even somebody as two-dimensional as Max from the Max Payne games or whatever it may be. That's obviously an aspect that you've been studying as well. It's like, why are they drawn so deeply to almost feel involved or to creating a relationship with these characters that are just purely fictional characters, but they're maybe like so well written or so well acted, and they resonate to such a degree.
So part of it you can take back to the parasocial relationships thing. So there's certain techniques that might be used. So the character might use direct address and like looked at the player. So if you're playing in first person, it looks like they're talking to you. When you first see a character, you make an evaluation about them depending maybe on their design. So as if you were making that same evaluation about a person in real life. So there's kind of various parallels between how we socialize with these characters and how we socialize with other people. And there's a writer a graphic artist called Scott McCloud, who talks about how actually we're even more likely to bond with things that look cartoony. So the characters don't even need to look realistic, because sometimes with a lot of fantasy stuff as well, if things are left to your imagination or they seem more abstract, we can kind of relate to them more and fill in the blanks and kind of project and make up part of the picture we have in our heads. And part of that picture is to do with kind of like the emotions we feel for them as well. So if the story's really good and we're sharing experiences with them, we're feeling like real emotions. Just because the thing is fictional doesn't mean that we're not feeling it. It might be a safer way to feel it or a different way.
Yeah.
But we're still feeling that. And that's kind of a way of getting immersed in a game. It's not just all about, I think as well, like the transition from, you hear people that talk about, oh, back in the day, like PlayStation was better before, and now they're just focusing on the graphics. And I think partly that's nostalgia, but partly it's also because the immersion that we feel is about the emotions. It's not necessarily about how good the game looks. It's about what it's doing to us.
Yeah.
And the kind of experiences that we're making with it.
Well, that's fascinating, because it's a lot of the time when we go back and revisit old games, which graphically don't really hold up, but because of those characters were so well established and the feeling of immersion in that world and in a particular context of a conversation with a character, we're so invested. One of my favorite series is Mass Effect from RPG developer BioWare, and a key part of that game is the relationships with your crew members. Some human, some alien, different factions within the game that, and in true RPG fashion, you have to establish relationships. You do favors for them. You help them out as part of this grander strategy to ultimately save the world and form alliances and different allegiances. And in that game, obviously there's romance options as well, but it's amazing to always see just how passionate like people get, who was your love interest, or who was your favorite, who was your bro, or your ride or die companion that you would always be there for. And it's just incredible that game dev, maybe more so than a lot of other industries, has such a passionate fan base that people really feel connected to them, and to the point where they will dress up as the characters and they go to conventions as cosplay and everything. So it's wild.
Yeah, with games, and I mean media in general, the way that fans express themselves, it kind of uses the game to signal things about who they are. And these conversations that we have about relationships that are fictional are kind of teaching us about what we think about relationships in like off screen. So it's kind of a good way of communicating. And that's why you have all these big communities with loads of fan art and cosplayers and people getting together around kind of the shared experience of a game or a movie or whatever, is because whatever they're kind of expressing about a thing is kind of saying something about either them or about what they think about the world. And it's just a way of connecting with people, really.
Yeah, it's again, I keep going back that it's such a fascinating field of study that you get to dive into, and it's, of course, it's so rich as well, with the history of video games going right back to like the original Super Mario and having to save the princess, right up until far more complex narrative based games like The Last of Us, where that's tapping into a very specific type of like revenge fetish almost. It's really showing the complexity of what game development can really bring now, where you sometimes only ever see that in literature or movies or cinema, but because you're an active participant in the actions and the relationships, it must be like super exciting to research.
Yeah, it's really, really cool as well, because it's a relatively new thing. But I think having the internet and things like that, especially now, gives us so much researchers, so much access to each other, and the chance to meet so many cool people that are looking into it. And I think game studies in particular is super fascinating, because it can be anything. It can be psychology, it can be games design and development, computing science, it can be educational, it can be to do with history. Working at the journal, I get to see so many fascinating papers from across so many fields. And because video games can be anything and they can be looked at from any perspective. So that's why it's really fascinating.
Yeah. So when obviously lockdown has probably changed how you like do studies and things of different pools of people. So previously, would you have got like groups of people in a room to like analyze and study, or is it more like relying on them to fill out surveys, or what is the typical process for even like beginning to research some of this stuff?
It depends what you do. So I have a literature background and I'm more into close reading and analysis.
Right.
I really would like to develop something which is, well, it's kind of comes from reader reception theory. So usually with English literature, you have kind of like an implied reader, and then the critic kind of makes assumptions about that reader and their interaction with the work. But with video games and the internet, we have let's plays and things like that. So I thought it'd be really interesting to not only analyze the game as kind of a literature critic or game studies critic, but to also link that with kind of let's plays and see how people respond to them as well. It would be really cool to actually talk to some people as well. But I'm still quite at the early days of developing my methods and things like that.
Yeah. What's been the most surprising like discovery, so to speak?
The fact that I can do this to begin with. I never even knew I could do a PhD. I was kind of one of the first people in my family to go to uni, and I didn't know I could study video games at all. I didn't know I could maybe make a career in it. It's mad. So the research itself is really fascinating. But at the same time, actually knowing that I had the option to do this, which is why I also think that talking about it and also talking about media literacy and letting people know that this is a thing, like that's really important to me, because I love teaching as well.
Yeah. So are you getting to like do other like workshops and presentations about your findings and ways to, I guess, collaborate as well?
Yeah. So we did recently a Tinderbox Festival, which was so cool. It was kind of a games festival across a couple of weeks run by people that usually specialize in music. And the atmosphere they made was amazing. It felt like actually going to a festival, because they played all the speakers in with amazing music and they had open mics, and it was like a party for 2 weeks. It was amazing. But also talking about research. So I'm lucky that I can do a work thing. That is also a fun thing.
You must have felt like an academic rock star or something. Was
was
it like a wrestling open where the music's playing and you walk down the middle right up to the stage?
Oh my gosh, that would be cool.
we should spitball like an academic like wrestling type persona name for you or something.
Oh god, it'd be like an awful debate show or something.
Can you imagine like an academic Royal Rumble? where
give him the chair.
Yeah.
But the chair is an idea, it's a concept. The chair doesn't exist.
Yeah. Schrodinger's idea or something. Yeah.
Oh my
it's
god.
like Yeah. Oh my goodness, so fascinating. So what kind of games are you playing just now, and are you doing it more as a fan of games, or are you like looking at games when you play them as, oh, this would be like super interesting to add to my field of study, or is it a kind of combination of the both?
It's really difficult because you'll play something and be like, I just want to play this for fun, and then I analyze stuff for fun as well. So then I start seeing all the connections. I'm like, no, this is not for work, because I think we can get. They say that, you know, if you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Mm-hmm.
But someone very clever said to me that actually, if you do something you love, you'll work every single day and you'll never stop. So I've definitely been kind of intrinsically burnt out some of the time. So after I did my degree in fantasy literature, which I did because I loved, I stopped liking fantasy literature quite as much.
Oh no.
And yeah, there was a while where I kind of couldn't get into games, except for when I was analyzing them for work, because I had no intrinsic need to do it, but I know I needed to do it for work. So I've been trying to find different kinds of games. So at the moment I'm playing Hades.
What a
which
game.
Is so good.
Yeah. Are you developing any connections to the gods and how thirsty the internet has become for all of these very attractive gods?
Best boy. Best boy. Yeah, it's really fun. And it's interesting too, because Zagreus is a character in himself. You don't get dialogue options or choices. So you can also develop the parasocial relationship for the character that you're playing, which is really interesting. And you get that through kind of seeing and experiencing his failures and wanting him to succeed. And I also think part of that is he's not really a player insert. He has a really strong story and a really strong personality. And that kind of makes us care for him more as like a different kind of entity, and not just like who we are in the game.
Yeah, it's super impressive, that game, because Supergiant Games I've been a fan of since Bastion came out, and that was very similar as well, because that character doesn't talk at all. It doesn't really have a personality as such, but all of the delivery of that game was by the narrator, who's actually talking about your actions and therefore like projecting a personality onto player agency and how they're controlling. And there was one bit which blew my mind at the very beginning, where as part of the traditional tutorial, where you had to smash a bunch of boxes to get to open up the pathway to continue the level. But the narration that came off the back of that was like the character's just really angry and he just rages for a while to destroy these boxes. I thought, oh, it's giving a personality to the character's frame of mind by flailing and destroying all of these boxes which were just sitting there in order to create a narrative. And that was super interesting. And then of course they've expanded their expertise into what is now Hades, and as you said, it's this kind of parasocial relationship of you really feel connected to Zagreus and the other gods, but you're not actually making any direct decisions. You're just trying to escape the confines of the underworld to get out, I guess, and be free. And again, that kind of meta narrative of being free because you feel oppressed, or you feel too like restricted and contained, is just another aspect of how clever that particular game is.
Definitely. And the fact that that failure is kind of built into it is really interesting, because I know a lot of people as well kind of very concerned about how good they are at games, and they feel like they can't play games if they're not good at it. Part of that is kind of the culture of gatekeeping and things like that we've had, and about, you know, games are for some people, they're not for others. And part of it's also because of, I think, all the achievements and things that you can get, and your magpie brain goes, oh, shiny, I must get all these achievements. And then you become so extrinsically motivated by these things that you forget to just enjoy the game. So it's nice to kind of have permission to fail, and failure being built into the system, because it kind of lets you not be so anxious about like doing the bad thing.
That's actually really interesting that you raised like the achievement popping or the trophy popping on over on other consoles. It's like a little endorphin hit or something that you've been rewarded for doing something, but then like the flip side to that is like the OCD in people who are driven mad because they can't get like one particular achievement unlocked, and it doesn't ultimately, like, it doesn't matter, but it's there, and therefore it's something to work toward. And like we talk about like 100%ing a game or getting the platinum trophy, which means you've like not just got all the achievements, but then it's like an extra reward on top of that because you've 100%ed everything. That is a super interesting addition to the games industry, which came, I think it was with the Xbox 360 kind of era or thereabouts. I can't actually remember my history now, but it was this kind of like meta game within the game that people just resonated with to get like a score, and then it became this competitive aspect of, hey, what's your gamer score? Oh, that's rubbish. I've got way more than that. Or, challenging each other to say, oh, have you got that achievement? And, it's this viral aspect of the meta game within the game.
It kind of really reduces stuff down to the data of it on a comparative level. But what you can't compare really is your experience of it, your subjective experience of it. It's really reductive in that way. Like, it is fun. It can be fun. Serotonin, yes. But at the same time, it's like it kind of misses the point sometimes. And I think there's some stuff like speed running, which is based on achievement, but the kind of games done quick and the communal nature of it kind of does consider the experience and makes it into a shared thing. So it's about mastery, but it's also about sharing it with people. It's not really, it's like about competing against the system rather than competing against like other gamers or other people, which is quite fun.
Yeah, speedruns blow my mind. I have no idea how people do it or how they work out how to do it. And God, yeah, I just can't get my head around that side of it as well.
Yeah, I think I was tempted to look at some speed runs for my research, but actually when I settled on doing things like Parasocial Relationships, if you speed run it, you would just skip all the content that I'm interested in. Like, I think I was looking at my research and I needed to go through Let's Plays, and actually games analysis takes a really long time. So I've been studying a visual novel, and then you have to look through all the routes to make sure everything fits. You have to watch so many Let's Plays to kind of see what's happening so that you can analyze the game. And my partner was like, why don't you just watch a speed run? And I was like, because that skips everything, because that's just not the point.
Yeah. It's like fast forwarding through a movie and you're missing the entire like plot and character development and everything just to get to the end.
I know. It's like they say hello and then you glitch away. That's it.
Has there been anything like that's been super surprising or subverted what you were maybe expecting when you were going to watch a Let's Play, and there was a particular type of game that you're maybe familiar with and you thought, oh, this person's bound to have like this reaction because of this thing, which is maybe consistent across other parts of your research, but then there's been like I didn't expect that.
I guess what I hadn't expected was the cohesion, really, because the way it is with research, especially when you're doing a chapter at a time, when you're doing such a big thing, it takes a really long time to just study one game. So at the moment I'm focusing on Undertale, and I'm watching some Let's Plays of that. And I kind of took my analysis from when I was doing my masters, so I kind of had some of the bones of it there. And then when I thought about, I'm going to look at Let's Plays and see how it actually works, I was surprised to see that some of the things I picked up in the text of the game were actually affecting the player how I kind of thought they might.
Right. Okay.
So it was nice to see the cohesion there. And it's really, when you're looking at analysis, you want it to work across multiple levels, and the more levels that it works at, the better it is, and the more cohesive an argument you can build around it, surrounding it.
Yeah.
So it's like It's like with an essay, you should be able to kind of pick one paragraph and read that, and and if it's good writing, it should work on its own, but then also form a part of the larger argument.
Wow.
So when I'm looking at games, I'm like, I can pick one part of it,
Yeah,
and that should link up to my theory about the rest of the game as well. And if it doesn't, then you have to go and then make adjustments and see whether it's
how many like let's plays of a particular game do you have to study in order to form a picture to make sure that your data's or your theory is becoming sound for your like report writing?
Well, it's a case of there's different ways of doing it. How I'm doing it is kind of on smaller case study basis. So with smaller projects, they're just as valid as larger ones, but you just have to make sure that you kind of explain your limitations,
right?
And explain that, this is just one take or this is a few takes. You kind of have to situate it properly. But if you do that, you don't need to go through loads and loads and loads, unless that's the kind of study that you're doing, because it also has to be realistic.
Yeah, you can't pull thousands of people and thousands of let's plays. You need a huge team and a lot of time for that kind of demographic. It must be quite mental, those ones. So my next question is like, how do you pick your games? It's obviously very broad. You obviously mentioned Undertale there. What kind of other games do you pick? I'm thinking things like maybe Little Nightmares might be on the horizon, just because of the imagery that game taps into is very nightmarish and very quite horrifying. But is there things like shooter games, or is it RPGs? Is what kind of framework do you have to think about in order to pick a game that you want to include in your research?
It's kind of one of those cases of why does anyone pick anything? So if you're kind of reviewing a book or a movie or something, you kind of have a reason for that that's a bit more subjective. It's because you see something in there that you want to explore and that you want to explain.
Right.
So rather than doing kind of a big rigorous survey, you kind of work from your subjective experience of kind of picking something and understanding it. And part of that as well is having the training to do that. So when you do a PhD, you've had your undergrad, you've had your master's, you've had however many years to kind of train yourself to be able to kind of analytically pull things apart. So I could probably apply analysis or an analytical framework to most things, but I'm going to pick things that I'm drawn towards and that I enjoy, because then I'm more likely to do the work and to find some value in it.
Fascinating stuff. It's really fascinating. I could listen to you talk about this stuff for probably for hours and hours, and I'm sure there's going to be maybe lots of questions that come up as well. And I think we're definitely going to have to get you back for follow-ups and just other bits of conversation as well. So what is what's next in terms of your next stages for your field of research?
The field in general are constantly evolving. For me, it's a case of we have progress reviews that we have to do, so I have to sort all that out and actually write the thing, which is a lot of fun. But I've also got a cool symposium at Worcester University that I'm going to zoom into. I've got a guest lecture at Erasmus University Rotterdam next week, which I'm really excited about, which I can do because of Zoom and the internet and things like that.
And your green screen as well. You can use that.
Yeah, maybe it will work next time.
That's amazing. So obviously you have to write this thing. When can we all expect to read this amazing paper?
Oh my goodness. So the whole thesis, I've got kind of a couple of years left to do it. If you want to see some of my work, I have an article on First Person Scholar, which is about a visual novel called Cinders, which I really liked. And it's kind of a feminist reading of that. I've also got a blog, which is at digital-fantastic.com, and that's kind of a creative nonfiction hybrid. So I talk about my research, I talk about my life. It's all very depressing, but also, fun and good expression. And it's nice to have visibility for issues that I care about on there as well. So if you want to read my stuff, then you can.
And you just published one as well, didn't you? Just recently.
Yes, I mean, the subject matter I'm not sure is like appropriate for this time if I don't want to get you banned. But enough. It's very much to do about image and femininity and how your relationships with people can influence your self-concept and things like that. And as someone who presents as a woman, there's so much stuff that you have to deal with regarding kind of patriarchal structures and perception and expectations and things like that. And I think being away from that sometimes in lockdown kind of helps you reflect on that. And I like to think about, why am I doing the things I'm doing rather than just living them and doing them?
Super interesting, guys, and I can't recommend it enough. It's absolutely worth checking out, and I feel a hell of a lot smarter just listening to you, and it's amazing. So if anybody has any obviously questions about your work, can they reach out to you on Twitter and socials?
Twitter's good, so I'm DigiFantastic on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, Gabriel, thank you so much for taking the time to chat your research, and it's such a fascinating aspect which we've barely really kind of tap the surface of, but I can't wait to see where your studies go and what other revelations and things come out of your thesis, and hopefully we can have you back as well on a future episode.
That'd be cool. Thank you. It's been such a fun chat.
Thank you. So everybody, if you've enjoyed this morning's Weekend Catch-Up Club podcast, do remember to give us a like, follow the channel, and if you're of course listening on podcast services, then hit that follow button as well. Until next time, I'll be back next week with another great guest, and have a great week ahead. Take care. Bye-bye.